The creek behind his ranch wasn't much to look at, just a slow, silver thread cutting through dry land and stubborn grass. But to him, it was peace. He came there every dawn, before the sun could burn the chill off the air, leading his horse down the narrow trail where the cottonwoods grew low and the world still felt untouched. The creek had a way of talking, soft, steady, never hurried, and most mornings, he liked to listen more than he spoke. He was a man of few words, and even fewer visitors. Out here, the wind was company enough. He'd grown used to the silence that came with living alone, the kind that settled not only in the house, but inside the chest, where old memories slept and dreams forgot to rise. The land was hard, but it was honest. It didn't pretend to love him, and that, somehow, was easier than the promises people made. That morning, the light was new, pale gold, slipping through the branches and laying quiet stripes across the water. He crouched by the bank, splashed his face, felt the cold bite wake his skin. Then he froze. There, a sound. A soft ripple that didn't belong to him or the horse. He turned his head slowly. The brush across the creek trembled, and through it came a shimmer of movement, delicate, human, and out of place. At first, he thought it was a trick of the light. But then he saw it, the curve of a shoulder rising from the water, the glint of dark hair heavy with river droplets. His breath caught before he could think. She stood half-veiled by mist and morning, her back turned, the current brushing against her skin like it knew her name. There was no fear in her, only grace, quiet and unguarded, as if the whole world had forgotten to watch. She moved with the patience of someone who'd known storms, who no longer hurried through beauty. He should have looked away, knew he should. But something deeper than curiosity held him there. It wasn't desire, it was recognition. The kind a lonely man feels when he sees someone carrying the same kind of silence he does. Then he noticed her clothes folded neatly on a rock, worn moccasins, a torn shawl, streaks of dried earth. She wasn't from any nearby town. And when he saw the faint scars along her shoulders, the dirt beneath her nails, a quiet truth began to take shape: she wasn't here to bathe. She was hiding. A breeze passed through the cottonwoods, and she turned just enough for him to glimpse her face, sharp, strong, yet tired, with eyes that had seen more sky than most men ever would. He stepped back without a sound, heart pounding, mind torn between warning and wonder. When he finally walked away, the world felt different. The creek still ran, the sun still climbed, but for the first time in years, he felt something alive stirring under his ribs. He returned to the creek the next morning, though he told himself it was for the horses again. The lie tasted thin, even to him. The dawn was colder this time, a pale mist crawling over the ground, making the world feel quieter than usual. He moved carefully through the brush, boots sinking in damp soil, the smell of wet sage hanging heavy in the air. The sound reached him first, the hush of water moving around something living. He stopped, his hand resting on a low branch, and looked through the leaves. She was there again. She stood knee-deep in the current, her dark hair unbound, flowing down her back like liquid shadow. The creek caught the morning light and threw it around her, painting her in flickers of silver. She wasn't bathing now, not quite, more like she was letting the water carry something away. Dust, maybe. Or memory. He couldn't see her face clearly, but he saw the way her shoulders lifted when she breathed, slow and deliberate, as though each breath was a promise she was trying to keep. There was strength in her stillness, the kind that came from surviving more than she should have. He noticed the scars again, faint against her skin, like pale threads woven into bronze. Not the kind a rancher's work would leave, nor the marks of a life spent safe. They told stories he didn't yet know. She moved toward the rocks where her clothes lay folded. The garments were plain, a woven dress, frayed at the hem, with beadwork that had lost its shine. Her moccasins were torn from long miles, the soles nearly gone. A bundle of herbs sat beside them, tied with a thin strip of deer hide, small traces of a life lived far from comfort. He thought of calling out, of stepping forward to offer help, or food, or even just a word. But something in him stayed still. He understood that sudden words could break fragile peace. And she didn't need rescuing. Not yet. Instead, he watched her raise her hands to her hair, wringing the water from it, sunlight catching the droplets as they fell. When she tilted her head back, eyes closed, the moment stretched, wild, untamed, and achingly human. The creek murmured softly around her. He could smell the river clay, the faint sweetness of crushed sage beneath his boots, the cool breath of morning air sliding through the trees. Then, suddenly, she turned her head slightly, not enough to meet his eyes, but enough to let him know she had always known he was there. A flicker of awareness passed between them, a quiet acknowledgement, like two travelers crossing paths in a land too wide for words. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She simply looked toward the water again, as if granting him permission to stay, just this once, as a witness to her peace. He felt something shift inside, an old kind of reverence. Not for beauty alone, but for the strength it took to still believe in gentleness after being hunted by the world. And as he turned to leave, the thought followed him all the way home, that woman wasn't hiding from me, she was hiding from everything else. The third night after he first saw her, the wind turned mean. It came down from the hills carrying the scent of rain and dust, bending the mesquite trees until they whispered warnings to the earth. He was in the barn, shutting the doors against the coming storm, when his lantern caught a flicker of movement by the gate. He froze. There, near the shadows, stood a figure. For a heartbeat, all he could hear was the restless shuffle of the horses. Then the lightning flashed, and he saw her. It was the same woman from the creek. Her hair was tangled, her dress soaked through, clinging to her shoulders. Mud streaked her legs, and she held one arm tight against her ribs as if it hurt to breathe. There was a wildness in her eyes, not fear exactly, but the look of someone who had been running too long and had nowhere left to go. When he took a step forward, she flinched, instinctively ready to flee. He stopped, raising his hands in a calm, wordless gesture, not surrender, not command, just understanding. "It's all right," he said quietly, his voice almost lost under the wind. "You're safe here." She hesitated, studying him like one might study an animal unsure if it bites. Her lips moved before sound came. "No safe place," she murmured. The accent in her English was soft but sure. He reached into his coat and pulled out a piece of jerky, held it out slowly. "Then maybe just a dry one." Something broke in her resistance, a tiredness deeper than fear. She stepped forward, trembling slightly as the thunder rolled overhead. When she took the food, her hand brushed his. Her skin was cold, and he could feel how faintly she was shaking. He led her inside, to the warmth of the barn first. She sat on an overturned bucket near the fire he built, her eyes darting to every sound like a creature that had learned too many times not to trust the quiet. After a long while, she said her name, Taya. Nothing else. No story. No reason. He didn't press. He just poured her a cup of hot water from the kettle and passed it to her. She drank with both hands around the tin cup, as if trying to warm her soul instead of her fingers. The firelight caught her face then, high cheekbones, a small scar near her lip, eyes that carried a kind of exhaustion only freedom could cure. She noticed him watching and looked away, her voice barely above the crackle of flame. "You shouldn't help me." He smiled faintly. "Guess I already did." Outside, the rain began to fall in heavy sheets, drumming on the roof. Inside, the silence between them thickened, not heavy, but full, like a space waiting to become something. He knew he should ask where she'd come from, why she was running. But somehow, he didn't need to. The look in her eyes told him everything, enough pain to fill a life, enough pride to survive it. When she finally fell asleep on the cot by the fire, he sat in the corner, watching the flames dance over the barn walls. He didn't know who she was or what kind of trouble followed her, only that the storm outside wasn't the only one worth sheltering her from. The storm passed by morning, leaving the land washed and new. The air carried that clean scent only rain can make, wet earth, mesquite, and smoke. For the first time in months, the ranch looked alive again. Puddles shimmered in the dirt, the horses pawed softly in their stalls, and above it all came the gentle sound of Taya humming. He didn't expect to hear her voice. It was low, almost hidden, the kind of melody someone sings to remember who they are. When he stepped into the barn, she stopped, as if the song had been a secret she wasn't meant to share. "Morning," he said carefully. She nodded, not meeting his eyes. She was sweeping the floor with a branch broom she must have made herself. The quiet between them felt thick, but not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that grows roots. He poured feed for the horses, trying not to look at her too much, failing more than once. She moved differently from anyone he'd known. Every gesture was deliberate, balanced, as though she carried her world in invisible pieces and couldn't afford to drop a single one. Later, he found her outside mending the old fence line. The sleeves of his shirt, one she'd borrowed, were rolled up to her elbows, and her hair was tied loosely behind her neck. She worked quietly, steady hands weaving wire with care. The sight stirred something inside him he hadn't felt in years, not hunger, not even attraction in the usual way, but a tenderness that asked for nothing in return. When she saw him watching, she didn't look away this time. "You don't ask who I am," she said softly. He shrugged. "You'll tell me when you need to." Her lips twitched, the ghost of a smile. "Most men would have sold me by now. I'm not most men." The way she looked at him then, steady, unreadable, made his heart stutter. There was gratitude there, yes, but also caution. She had learned the hard way that kindness can turn to danger if you trust too quickly. That evening, they shared supper by the fire inside the house. The rain had returned, tapping gently on the roof. She sat across from him, her posture straight, her eyes studying the flicker of flame more than his face. He wanted to ask 100 questions. Instead, he asked one. "That song you were humming this morning, what does it mean?" She hesitated, then said, "It's a prayer. For those who wander." He nodded, and they fell into silence again. But it wasn't the lonely kind anymore. It was full of unspoken things, understanding, respect, and the first trace of trust. Later, when she stood to leave, her hand brushed his shoulder as she passed. The touch was brief, almost accidental, yet it carried the weight of something fragile, a bridge forming between two separate worlds. When he watched her disappear into the small room he'd given her, he realized the strangest thing: the ranch didn't feel empty anymore. The sky turned restless again that night. Clouds gathered like bruises over the hills, and the wind came down hard from the north, rattling the shutters and stirring the dust that the rain had only just settled. He was fixing the latch on the barn door when he saw her through the storm's haze, Taya, running from the paddock toward the house, her shawl pressed tight around her shoulders. The rain came in sheets, cold and angry, but she moved with purpose, not fear. When she stepped through the door, dripping, hair clinging to her neck, her eyes met his, and neither spoke. He threw a few more logs on the fire, and the room filled with that warm, golden glow that softens the edges of everything. She stood by the flames, hands stretched toward the heat, her breath trembling just enough to make his chest ache. "You should change," he said quietly. "You'll freeze that way." "I've known colder," she answered, her voice calm but tired. He nodded, then reached for a blanket on the chair and offered it. She hesitated before taking it, her fingers brushing his, a small contact, but enough to quicken something under his ribs. The rain battered the roof harder now, the sound thick and constant, as though the world outside had vanished. It left only them, the firelight, and the storm. For a long time, neither spoke. He sat across from her, watching the way the light played on her face, how it made the faint scar on her cheek shimmer like a silver line of truth. There was a stillness to her, a kind of grace that came not from gentleness, but endurance. When lightning cracked across the sky, she startled, her eyes flicking toward the window. He rose, closed the shutters, then turned, closer now than before. She didn't step back. "You've seen storms before," he said softly. "Too many," she murmured, her voice almost lost under the rain. He wanted to reach out, to offer comfort, not as a man to a woman, but as one wounded soul to another. Instead, he did something smaller, truer. He took the lantern from her hands where she held it too tight, set it down, and said, "You're safe here." Her gaze lingered on him, searching for doubt. Finding none, she exhaled, a breath that seemed to carry years of running. The fire cracked. A lock of her hair slipped free, falling across her face. He reached out without thinking, brushing it back gently. His fingers barely grazed her temple, but it was enough to fill the space between them with unspoken things. Neither moved. Neither smiled. The silence said everything. After a moment, she stepped away, slow, deliberate. "You shouldn't look at me like that," she whispered. He swallowed hard. "Then you shouldn't look back." The storm raged on outside, but inside, something quieter, and far more dangerous, had begun. Not desire. Not yet. Just the first spark of trust turning warm enough to burn. When he finally banked the fire and watched her walk down the hall to her room, he realized he was no longer thinking about the storm outside. He was thinking about the one she carried with her, and how much he wanted to understand it. Dawn came pale and uneasy, the kind that carries more warning than warmth. The storm had moved on, but it left the air heavy, as if the land itself was holding its breath. He woke early, restless, and found Taya already outside, standing by the fence line with her shawl pulled tight. Her eyes were on the horizon, where a thin trail of dust rose, a shape too straight, too steady to belong to weather. Riders. He didn't need to count them to know what they were. Soldiers. He felt his stomach drop. Out here, they didn't wander this far unless they were looking for someone. She saw it too. Her face didn't change much, just a stillness, like she'd been expecting this moment all along. "They found the trail," she said quietly. He nodded once. "Get inside." She didn't move. "You shouldn't hide me. If they catch you helping, they'll take everything you own." "I've lost things before," he said, eyes still on the horizon. "Never lost myself, though. Not yet." That made her look at him, really look, as if she was seeing the kind of man he was only now beginning to understand himself. Then she turned and followed him back toward the house, silent and quick. He led her to the cellar beneath the kitchen floor, a small space lined with jars and dry goods. "Stay here. Don't make a sound until I come back." She caught his arm before he could close the door. "Why are you doing this?" He hesitated, met her eyes. "Because I can't unsee you. Not the way you look, the way you survive." For a moment, the world seemed to narrow to just them. Her hand slid down his sleeve, fingers trembling, then let go. "Whatever happens," she whispered, "don't lie for me. I'd rather die free than live as someone's secret." He nodded, but when he shut the door, his chest felt hollow. Moments later, the sound of horses filled the yard. He stepped outside, squinting into the rising sun. 3 soldiers dismounted, dust settling around them like smoke. Their leader, a hard-eyed man with a gray beard, tipped his hat. "Morning," the officer said. "We're looking for an Apache woman. Escaped last week. You seen anyone around?" The rancher's pulse thundered in his ears, but his voice came out steady. "Ain't seen a soul out here but my own reflection." The officer studied him for a long moment, then spat into the dirt. "You see her, you send word. She's dangerous." They left as suddenly as they'd come. The sound of hooves faded into the distance, leaving only the wind and the heartbeat in his chest. He waited until the dust settled, then went inside and lifted the cellar door. She was there, crouched in the dim light, her face pale but calm. "They're gone," he said softly. She looked at him, really looked, and in that silence, something passed between them that felt like a promise neither dared to speak aloud. "I'll leave tonight," she said finally. "I can't let you lose your life because of mine." He shook his head. "You don't owe me leaving, Taya." But she only smiled, sad and sure. "And you don't owe me saving." When she touched his cheek, it was light as breath, a gesture of thanks, of farewell, of everything they wouldn't say. Then she turned away, leaving him with the ache of knowing that doing the right thing could still feel so wrong. A week passed. Then another. The land began to dry again, the puddles shrinking into dust, the sky returning to its hard, blue silence. Life slipped back into its old shape, the work, the miles, the quiet meals, but the rhythm had changed. He still woke before dawn, still led the horses to water, still mended fences and burned brush. But now, every small sound, a branch breaking, a bird's cry over the ridge, made him look up, half expecting to see her. Taya. The name stayed with him like a prayer he didn't know how to finish. The soldiers hadn't returned. Maybe they'd given up. Maybe she was miles away by now, back to her people, or further still, to some place where the earth didn't know her name. He hoped so. One morning, he rode down to the creek again. The same one where he'd first seen her, bathed in silver light and silence. It was early, the kind of quiet hour that makes a man think too much. The water moved slow and clear, catching the sun like scattered coins. He dismounted, crouched by the bank, and let his fingers trail through the current. The touch of the water carried memory. He could still see her standing there, proud, unafraid, the world falling away around her. He remembered the curve of her shoulders, the steadiness in her eyes, and that quiet strength she carried like armor. She had walked into his life with no warning, and left it the same way, but somehow, she'd taken the silence with her. He smiled faintly. "You were right," he murmured. "No safe place." "Not really." A breeze stirred the trees overhead. Somewhere upstream, a heron lifted off, its wings catching the light like silver cloth. The world was alive again, and for the first time, he didn't feel alone in it. He pulled something from his pocket, the strip of beaded cloth she'd left behind. He hadn't realized she'd forgotten it until that morning after she was gone. The beads were dull now, but the pattern, a single line of blue running through red and brown, looked like the river itself, winding through dust and time. He tied it around a branch near the water, where the wind could find it. It fluttered gently, whispering against the bark. A small sign, maybe, for her, or for himself. Then he sat back, watching the sunlight play across the surface of the creek. He thought of the nights she'd spent by his fire, the quiet conversations, the look in her eyes before she left, not of sorrow, but of gratitude. She had changed him without meaning to. She had reminded him what stillness could hold when you stopped fearing it. When he finally stood to leave, he looked back once more. The branch moved in the wind, the little strand of color catching light, dancing like a memory that refused to fade. The creek ran on, soft and steady, carrying her story somewhere he couldn't follow. He placed a hand over his chest, where the ache had become something gentler, not pain, not loss. Just remembrance. And for the first time in a long while, he spoke her name out loud, letting it drift into the morning air, not to call her back, but to let her go.